Clara turns the key around in her hand. A sigh escapes her lips, a lit cigarette between them, as her vision settles over the box on her knees. Her legs bounce, making the contents in the box rattle. The humid air of that particular Friday night fills her with as much cold as the so-called gift fills her with dread. One doesn't become a young woman every year. She'll only turn 18 once in her life. And the little metallic and somewhat rusty box isn't the kind of present she'd expected as a celebration for the unique occasion. Still, it's not like she's got too much family left to celebrate with her. Since she was a young child, members of her family had the unfortunate habit of disappearing. It wasn't ever a dramatic departure. They would just go out one night only to never return. Clara had been shipped from one relation to another, slowly working through the family tree till it was only her and her grandma now. For her birthday, the older woman handed her a piece of paper with an address scribbled on it, 2 keys, and nothing more before returning to her room, deep within the warrens of their small house. Friends hadn't been a part of her life for quite a while either. Who would want to hang out with a local orphan whose family kept disappearing one by one? Clara shakes her head and finally opens the box. There's an object inside. It's round, smooth, and cold to the touch. Claire is looking at a rock. For a moment, her stomach sinks and disappointment threatens to overwhelm her. Driving to the other side of town to even find the safety deposit box had been an ordeal that lasted 2 entire days, because the office itself had closed years ago. By the time Clara found the building's remains, all of the safety boxes had been forced open. All except for one. Mysteriously, it was her box, the one she could open with the key that her grandma had given her, that had been left untouched. All for a rock. A pretty rock, but a rock nonetheless. Clara is tempted to throw it into the tall grass she hadn't cut in weeks, but when she grabs the object, light reflects on it in an unnatural way. That's when she notices there's something carved into the rock. 2 circles, one encompassing the other with the space between them inscribed by small lettering from an alphabet she couldn't recognize. In the center, there's a rune. Of that she's sure. Age had been kind to the stone, she thinks, considering the carvings seem almost new. "Grandma?" she calls, her head turning to look inside her house. No one answers. Clara doesn't think much of it, as her grandma tends to go to sleep early. She goes back to the careful examination of her newly inherited talisman. Why, she thinks to herself, did her absent family leave behind a carved rock? Did it have something to do with their disappearances? Was it a clue as to where they are now? She feels the faint stirrings of hope at this last thought. But before she can latch onto it, a million other questions swarm around her head like angry bees. Too many questions. There was so much she didn't know. Claire gasps for air as the ancient pain of abandonment grips her once more. But holding the stone in her hand, her despair morphs into a different kind of desperation. One for answers, damn it. She sticks her head into the house. "Grandma?" she calls out once more. No one answers. Clara clicks her tongue, grabs her keys, and makes her way to the local library. It's a quiet place, eerily so, and Clara isn't the biggest fan of books. Even so, there's no other place in town that could offer the information she's looking for. The smell of ink and paper accompany her as her fingers travel over worn spines and wooden shelves. Earlier, she'd rejected the librarian's help, feeling the need to keep her small quest a secret. It's her gift. she shall do as she wishes with it. There's an entire section about runes, and it takes Clara 3 full hours to peruse it fully. She's halfway done with books about runes from A to L when she finds inscriptions identical to her carvings. They're on a picture of a tombstone from a cemetery located in the town's outskirts, by the coast. There's not much of a description beneath the picture, beyond the name of the cemetery and the phrase, "Place of the Deal," scribbled in messy handwriting. With the help of a local map, Clara returns the book to its place and runs out. The librarian shushes her as she hurries by. It can't be mere coincidence. There has to be a reason, an explanation that would explain the rock, the tombstone, and their connection with Clara. Whatever lead it could offer about her parents' whereabouts would be a balm to her soul. So Clara leans heavily on the gas and doesn't look back. Once she's done, she'll confront her grandmother, she thinks. The directions lead her to a small group of homes and businesses by the edge of the coast at night. It's a familiar sight for Clara, except for the fact that this seaside retreat, usually so crowded that you can't normally see the water, is deserted. The hushed surroundings have an eerie tinge to it. She parks beside the only diner open and walks in, cringing at the ringing of the out-of-tune bell. There's barely any clientele inside. The waitress sweeping the linoleum floor peeks at her from beneath her long fringe. "What do you want?" the woman barks, not stopping her sweeping. Clara frowns and takes a deep breath, averting her gaze from the fish-like eyes of the waitress. "I'm looking for..." Her nails burrow into the side of one of her thighs. "Has anyone with the last name Evans come through here by any chance?" The reaction to her last name is immediate. The other patrons freeze in their tracks. Some send furtive, odious looks in Claire's direction, and the waitress's broom falls to the ground. "You better leave," the woman says. "But..." "That name isn't welcome round these parts," a diner interjects. "Not after what they did." Someone else cries out, "Heathens!" The waitress picks up the broom and stands menacingly, pointing it to Clara as if to use it as a weapon. She's made her stance clear, and Clara turns around to leave. As she passes by the table closest to the door, an old man presses a newspaper into her hand. Clara tries to question him, but the waitress is faster and closes the door in her face. Clara curses and hits the door with the newspaper, noticing the main article on its cover. It's a relatively short report about local disappearing children, and she deems it a threat from the old man. No wonder the town seems on edge. Deciding not to waste any more time, she makes a beeline for the cemetery. Like the rest of the little coastal town, the place is mostly abandoned. Vines cover tombstones and memorials, growing into and carving crevices of all shapes and sizes. Flowers bloom from the stems, and the sight is strangely beautiful to her eyes. Something compels her to follow the flowers, which seem to shine under the moonlight. At the end of the colorful road lays the tombstone, the one with the rune. Her fingers tap the stone softly, admiring the rough texture and avoiding the patches of moss. She inhales, and for a moment, Claire swears that she heard someone else breathe too. Although it's night and she's alone in a cemetery, so she deems the thought a mere product of her imagination. Her hand pulls the rock out of her pocket and places it on top of the tombstone. And then, nothing happens. Clara wonders whether the underwhelming result is worse than the alternative. Yet, after a couple of seconds, a rustling sound behind her grabs her attention. She turns to face a tall, monstrous, and shapeless shadow hovering over her. It slides as if floating over the irregular ground, in her direction. Clara, horrified, takes a step back as her brain races to understand the image in front of her. It fails, and the thing closes the distance, wafting a pungent odor towards her with the maddening movement of its infinite limbs. Clara screams, feet toppling over memorials. Her hands claw at the ground, pulling her body behind her. She manages to crawl and evade the leaping shadow by inches, which gives her enough time to stand and run. Her car is too far away, and the creature is so fast. Her feet turn, and Clara finds the only available shelter, a mausoleum. She throws herself inside and wedges herself against the open door, throwing all of her weight behind it to push it closed with a resounding thud. For a moment, the woman feels safe. She breathes. She's not the only one that does. A soft burst of air hits her from the back, and she realizes that it's here. Without looking back, Clara takes out her lighter and flicks it on. The small dancing flame brings out irregular shadows around her. She decides she doesn't have a choice. She has to turn around and look. She's met with endless twin pools of nothingness that must be its eyes. There's more than one pair of eyes. There are countless, fixating on her, waiting for her in the shadows. They reach for her, extending tentacles of darkness all over her and taking a firm hold of Clara. But she's not afraid. Not anymore. She has no reason to be afraid. Not of them. Never. Instead, elation fills her body, and tears blur her vision. The light dances erratically until someone, blows it out. In the darkness, cold and welcoming, her family embraces her for the first time in years.
Subscribe today, or